Hey kids, you want to be horribly depressed? I know I do. Let's get on with Goodnight, PunPun.
Their own way, and I hope we hang on past the last exit. I hope it's already too late, and I hope the junkyard a few blocks from here.
Hello all, it's of course AJP here today, ready to talk about one of my personal favorite mangas of all time and one of the most depressing things ever written and potentially one of the darkest things ever written. Goodnight, PunPun. What can I say about this series that has not been said already, besides from the few people that have a niche taste, or people who've watched The Masked Man, whatever the case. What can I say beyond my own personal experiences, and also, obviously, for you newcomers to anime and manga, why you should read it. Now, Goodnight PunPun was written by Inio Asano, a rather colorful and rather interesting individual who has a rather huge focus, not necessarily on the traditional escapism that's usually very common within Japan, which I'll get to later, but as well as sort of the postmodernist, very deconstructive ideals that are associated typically with postmodernism, especially within specifically regards towards manga itself, which he'll draw into many other philosophies within this work, from Nietzsche towards even Carl Jung, and it's all just neatly, tightly, and wrapped within this sort of pseudo-dark and cynical comedy on par with fucking South Park, with how fucking disturbed it can get, to outright one of the most depressing and horrifyingly real stories out there. Especially if you know certain regards to what inspirations that PunPun is drawing from, both real and fictitious. Now, what is PunPun about? PunPun is specifically about a young, well, let's just say boy, for the sake of it, even though he's a bird, about essentially a young boy coming into his life and basically how he lives, you know, what everything he goes through, how he experiences things, everything like that. Now, if I were to say anything specific, it's a coming-of-age story with a very dark and morbid twist. Now, maybe that potentially ruins a bit of the surprise with PunPun to say that, but I think this warning is very much needed, because the intention of PunPun was certainly originally to get people who don't really watch or read things that are very dark and heavy, tricking people to essentially think it's a simplistic, usual coming-of-age slice-of-life story that's very common, more so in Japan. Like, you know, it's the slice-of-life genre is certainly a thing. It's an element within novels and media over here. Certainly, there's very soap opera-y stuff. However, Japan has a very slice-of-life centered genres that are just purely just people living their day-to-day, and there's no fucking movement of plot. Essentially, it's just basically escapism for even some people, you know, and in some weird way, it's a way for people to essentially live lives with people through another medium and maybe another way, which, you know, essentially art is for. However, Asano is of the belief that escapism is an inherently dangerous thing to do, and especially with regards to Japan, if you know Japanese culture, with things like NEET, Yakuza, sex, violent, anime mediums, shoujo, shonen, seinen, everything around there, and how typically it's almost to the point a part of culture to escape reality rather than accepting and facing reality itself, which, you know, is one of the core themes, and as well as a very strong motif within Asano's work. Is just his stories are never really about, you know, a very grandiose or fitting world. It's more focused upon reality itself, which, you know, it's sort of, dare I say, postmodernist take on that, but that sounds a bit more pretentious, and I think I'm doing disservice towards Asano doing that. And don't think PunPun's like this rambly philosophical thing upon with, like, you know, the bird charisma or anything akin to that. PunPun is what I would compare to Stephen King somewhat, in the there's under themes, yeah, but it's very much, he has a lot of grounded stuff that's very realistic for how kids can act by Japanese standards, because Japanese kids are very much different in how they're raised on morality comparatively to over here in the States. There is a very clear cultural difference. However, the PunPun kids still very much feel like kids in how they act and how they view life. And it's honestly one of the best coming-of-age stories I've seen, even disregarding the main overarching plot with the main character himself, PunPun. Now, I think I actually would have to mention why is PunPun a bird? Well, as I mentioned before, PunPun his design was meant to trick you, the audience, who are typically not familiar or used towards, like, you know, this darker slice of life stuff, into thinking this is going to be a happy comedy romp. And it's also the case of sort of a disassociation thing, but I'm not going to get into that. It's almost sort of a representation of innocence or blind innocence in a sense. And it's kind of there for, you know, that darker edge tones, the dark comedy aspect of PunPun, which admittedly, if you thought First Law has a fucked up sense of humor, this series has a hugely fucked up sense of humor. Which, even by Japan, which will have jokes about dudes having their fucking heads blown off as a comedy, even PunPun by that standard has like very dark comedy. Like, Japan's not really like the most PC of countries, so even by that standard, Asano's standards are pretty fucking dark. And it's not really talking about the dark, like when he doesn't have any comedic element towards it, the cynical side of society, and it just focuses on the fucked up aspects. You got stuff with Kyuza going on in the background that people don't really mind, which does say a lot. You have someone being in denial of family members, someone being raped, lots of stuff with sex, violence, and awkwardness with both a teenage, adult, children. It's just such a fucked up thing, and I do have to mention it because it has to be said. This story is not going to be for everyone. PunPun is, honest to God, one of the darkest series I've ever read because it's such a good representation of how depression is precisely. This is what I think the best thing about the comics can do when they're at their full potential, of how a good artist and a good author is able to utilize the medium completely. Because even with my attempts to try to convey something, and even with something I would dare say like on par with House of Leaves, which I think I have behind me, in fact, let me see if I can grab it. I don't actually have it behind me. That sucks. But yeah, with House of Leaves, even that, with like the most postmodernist novel I've ever potentially read. And there it is, actually. Oh, it's right there. Oh, embarrassing. I should actually make a video on this, but Austin McConnell did a video on that. That was pretty good. Even with something with, like, you know, a postmodernist take from that, like, you know, stuff like this. One of the finest novels of. You know, with, let's see if I can find a good example of another page. Pages that look exactly like this, that sort of convey sort of eternal thoughts of the cast, and sort of scenes and how claustrophobia and all that would work. I think with the medium of PunPun, it does it even more. Like, it's able to express really the ideas with him. Like, you know, this thing right here, this fucking panel right here is very representative of how fucking good at paneling and ideas. It's just one huge, long, run-on sentence and paragraph that Asano is able to convey really well. And try reading it. I recommend really reading that. It's a bit blurred, the photo, sadly, but yeah. Essentially, with sort of this element of postmodernism, it's very dark, very bleak, and it's just such a brilliant composition. And I think a lot more people just kind of take that for granted sometimes, because it's just like, oh, you know, good art and all that. But, like, it's just like, wow, fucking fantastic. The art just is fucking gorgeous. He's able to capture emotion. It's deliberate. It's such a fucking magnificent way of how to convey so much and so little. And I think PunPun's the best example of how you can utilize the medium to convey so much about your characters, about the story and the narrative, without having a lot going on. Like, admittedly, PunPun's story is very simple. It's just someone's life and how it just spirals away, essentially. There are 3 plot lines that go on with PunPun. The other 2 can feel incredibly pointless. However, they're very necessary into actually conveying certain ideas and themes and motifs for what PunPun's about. And once you do, you're just like, holy shit. And I want to reread it. It's even like, what the fuck? How can I not pick this up the first time? So even if it's like your first time reading, like you'll still click. But on the second time or third time you're going to reread PunPun, you'll just realize, wow, this is one of the fucking best things I've ever read. There's so much layered foreshadowing that's subtle, and at the same time, very in front of your face. So immediately, it's one of the things about the almost deliberate nature, which is even shocking to me because PunPun wasn't apparently planned to an extent. A lot of it was just kind of meant for it to end at a certain extent, how and everything just kind of went through, because of course it's about life, so of course like the through line of how it operates is going to be very much different. What else can I say about this series beyond just the gorgeous fucking art, the great fantastic character of PunPun himself? PunPun is, I think, an example of like when I really test how you can handle characters. By that I mean how you're going to handle morality, because you're very much going to be sort of understanding and sympathetic of PunPun in the beginning, and the story is going to really make you test your sense of morality as well as your sense of thought on a person and individual. Let's see what else, because beyond just the fact of the warnings I give, I do have to say this is a very depressing story, and it's not for the faint of heart. I do not recommend reading it if you can't handle suicide, depression, rape, murder, anything along those lines. I do recommend you just stay away from the story. It's bleak and dark, and it just seems hopeless. And even though the author does say it's not hopeless, I would argue differently. It's one of the most full-on blown, not even just nihilism, it's just pessimism to an extent for me. I would say it's nihilistic in the sense of how you have to kind of persevere through life, but that's just sort of how it is. It's just, and this isn't spoilers, by the way, it's just a warning for you of why you shouldn't read it. That's reason for me and other people like me who have similar tastes to, you know, actually read it. Beyond just the gorgeous art and great composition and moments and story and narrative, what else can I really say about PunPun that hasn't been said? It's been talked to death by more popular YouTubers than me, and they honestly, I would argue, do a better job than I do at potentially conveying why the series is great from an objective stance, because I just explained it. The characters are great, the story, while simplistic, is very effective at communicating what it wants. It's dark, it's bleak, and it's real. It's one of the best depression story, one of the best showcases of depression I've seen since No Longer Human. Novels specifically, I don't refer to the mangas. The manga are fucking awful, but I'll get to that one day. What else can I say about this series? What else can I say beyond just my own personal experience? The series means a lot to me. It's I'm a bit perfectly fine guy. I have awful depression. I have terrible, awful fucking depression, and it's crippling at times. And just, it's weird because you would think a story like this would just be like, it's too fucking much, man. It actually did it. It kind of just messes with you a bit. Kind of just makes you want to be a better person in a way, and that's one of the things I like about dark stories. It's just sort of a way of just saying it's either a cautionary tale or it's just making me feel incredibly sympathetic and make this cast even more relatable to me. It's probably essentially this morbid humor in mine as well that really does help as well. And it's just real to me. It means so much, and just like that postmodernist, the paneling, the composition, it's what I want to write as a novel, and it's just like, it's my standard for what I consider one of the finest things ever written. Does it beat out North Star? It's probably, objectively speaking, it's definitely better than North Star. Subjectively, I still prefer North Star and Goblin Slayer too, but I would definitely say PunPun's up there as just one of the greatest things ever written, and it's one of my favorite things ever written. Now, I already gave the warning as to why you probably shouldn't read it, but what else shouldn't you read it? It takes its time, honestly. And beyond just the depressing element, it's a very much a deliberate, very kind of slow element. I also think sometimes people are going to potentially be worried about how the women are presented in the story. No, that's not a sexist story. I don't mean that. I just know someone's going to fucking complain about it. The women in the story are very fully realized, and it's also seen through the context of how Japan is a country. Asano can write really compelling and well-dealt female characters, while also providing interesting commentary about Japan's society as a whole, not just specifically towards gender roles, albeit that is still there, but specifically how women are, and it's honestly one of the best ever. All his characters are flawed, get fully realized, they have a lot of dimensions towards them, and it's just also the case of, well, certainly the stories up front, it'd be able to communicate a lot to you. And if there's any other reason besides the stuff I mentioned about the darker aspects of the narrative, and as well as the fact that it's just generally you might not enjoy it because of just the postmodernist nature of it. Now, if you don't know what I mean by that, I obviously just refer to more or less just experimental and really fucking art out there. There's a lot of unreliable narration in PunPun. A lot of stuff is not really concrete. It's vague, intentionally vague, and it just leaves you sort of analyzing and have to dissect the narrative even more. Which honestly, you prefer that sort of more concrete, more linear, more. It's basically solid and foundational narratives. I don't think you would enjoy PunPun, essentially. What else can I say beyond just that? Honestly, that's probably why you should read this. Great for it. It's finished as well, so if you have problems with that. Now, another reason is actually, honestly, the price. It's fucking annoying getting physical editions for PunPun. It's ridiculous just how fucking expensive the physical editions are. It's the fucking scalpers, and I don't think there's going to be actually another reprint. I'm unsure, because I don't think this series kind of, I think, suffered a bit from lack of popularity, so there's not really a huge fight. It's a cult hit. It was relatively successful, but it's still just low-key, and I understand why. It's not fun. Anyways, guys, if you want to see the rest of the videos, I highly recommend to subscribe right now. I'm going to be leaving you out. And what can I say? Watch Moral Oral. Moral Oral is good. That's getting a video. That shit's bleak. Shouldn't have been canceled. Fuck you, Adult Swim. AJB out, guys. See you later.